All right, Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Of course, I just told everyone all the amazing things about how you grew up in the vineyard, went to college, and then came back and now are running the whole place, which is so impressive. You're a woman, you're dynamic, you're the head of the winery here since 2011. And so we're just excited to learn more about Dry Creek Vineyard, taste a couple of your great wines, and really kind of go from there. So I was talking a little bit about the background of the winery and your dad being the founder, but maybe you could just kind of tell us, your sort of take on how this all developed. I'm sure your dad has stories that he has told you.
Absolutely. I'm very proud to be carrying on the family tradition. So it's easy for me to talk about my family and specifically my father. My parents were from Boston. My dad did not grow up in a wine drinking family. He was actually a civil engineer, went to MIT. But when I was very young, we moved to Germany. And that's where my parents kind of got bitten by the wine bug originally. They liked, obviously, German wines. They loved French wines. They fell in love with the Loire Valley. And so when my father came back to Boston in the late 1960s, he decided he wanted to make a career change. He actually tried to get a job as a salesman at a distributorship, but they wouldn't hire him because he had no experience. And so he convinced my mom that they should sell everything they owned and literally load the kids in the car, drive across America so he could go to graduate school at UC Davis. And on the weekends, they would travel around and look for property to buy in Napa and, of course, Sonoma County, and I think even a little bit up north of here in Mendocino County. But somehow, on a handshake deal, he stumbled across this very neglected parcel in the middle of Dry Creek Valley, which was a very neglected, kind of sleepy valley, and he bought a very rundown prune orchard. Now, the valley, I think what attracted him to the region is that the valley did have a proven track record for grape growing and a fairly vibrant wine industry prior to Prohibition. But after Prohibition, pretty much everything had been, or most everything had been converted to prune orchards. And so he bought this 55-acre rundown prune orchard and bulldozed those trees and planted the first vines. And really, the rest is history. I mean, he did
Wow.
it in an era when the local farmers were they were not warm and embracing, let's put it that way. They did not like the idea of prune trees being torn out in favor of grapevines.
Sure, and this whole family from Boston, which probably had an
Exactly.
accent a little bit different than everyone in the
Exactly.
area, but sort of the rest is history, as you say. And now you're probably one of the most known wineries there in Sonoma, and especially, of course, in Dry Creek Valley, which your name alludes to as well. When you were growing up, I know you've kind of served a lot of roles since you were a teenager. Did you always want to be in the family business? I know you
No,
went off to college and then came back, but
no,
how did that all come together?
ironically, I never wanted to have anything to do with the wine industry or the wine business or the winery. And part of that was that I spent, so much of my childhood here. And of course, I worked in the bottling line all through high school. And I really didn't have an intention to join the wine industry. I actually loved French, I think you know, Lori. And
Hmm.
I loved design, and I ended up working in the fashion design industry for a while and spending some time in France. But when I was in I'd say my mid 20s, I was sort of in between jobs, and I realized if I was really going to be a success in that industry, I pretty much had to move to New York. Well, I grew up here in the middle of Dry Creek Valley. I was married to a farmer. I was in my soul was a country girl, and I knew I would not move to New York. So my father offered me a job, and it was pretty much going to be a temporary thing.
Mm.
And I won't tell you how many years ago that is, but it was a long time ago. I think one of the things that I have loved about my career here at the winery is that I've had an opportunity to really do pretty much every job at the winery, with the exception of the winemaker. I was never the winemaker, but it has allowed me to have, you know, not necessarily be an expert on everything, but to have a little bit of knowledge of all aspects of the business and to also have a lot of empathy and understanding of various jobs, within the winery, which I think when take over, I took over as president 11 years ago. And I think that's one of the things that helps me in my leadership role.
For sure.
And it turned out that I loved it. I mean, obviously, I never looked back. So
That's great. And speaking of looking, of course, I know, when I see this nautical theme is iconic. It's Dry Creek Vineyard, it's something you're known for and people associate with the winery. I live in Maryland on the Eastern Shore, and there's a lot of sailing around here, a lot of boaters and especially sailors in this area. And I know your wines are popular because they're great inside, but also people love it as a gift for anyone who loves sailing because of this iconic label. And I was reading that you and your fashion sense had something to do with this. How did you come about changing the labels to what we're used to seeing today?
Well, so my parents ended up divorced. My father was a single father throughout my teenage years, and we spent a lot of time sailing on San Francisco Bay. That was his passion. That was his secondary passion. That was his hobby. And in fact, it was before I came back to work for the winery.
Mm.
We were out on the boat sailing with my husband. I was a young bride and working in San Francisco in the fashion industry, and out on the San Francisco Bay with my father. And I said to Dad, because his labels back then were very, very traditional, and we, kind of the typical sort of little line drawing of the winery, and very, very traditional and very sort of boring, to be honest. And I said, Dad, you love to sail. What would happen if you put a sailboat on a brand called Dry Creek? And I thought there was a sort of irony about it that was kind of funny. And it happened to be right at the same time that, if you remember the old Kenwood Artist series, and
Yes.
then the Rothschild family in Bordeaux, they had just come out with an artist series. But by and large, all the other labels in the wine industry were very traditional, kind of French chateau styled labels. So my father said, "Oh my gosh, that's such a great idea." He kind of cut me loose, and we had a friend who was an artist here locally who we commissioned the very first sailboat paintings. They were watercolors. And ironically, the very first one, Lori, was a Chesapeake Bay skipjack, which still hangs in the office here, the original watercolor. But we introduced those first labels, and it was a huge success. And for over 40 years, we've stuck with the sailing imagery, and it's, taken different turns over the years. And I used to actually commission new paintings every year, but we've kind of settled on our core paintings, and it's allowed us to not only differentiate the brand and really kind of pay homage to our family's love of sailing, but also to sort of position ourselves as the official wine for sailors. And we've been involved in many sailing sponsorships over the years, and we've been chosen by the America's Cup World Series races to serve wines there. And actually in 2013, one of my greatest, so much fun, it was such a great accomplishment too, was to be chosen by the team called Artemis Racing as their official wine sort of winery. And it was ironic because they were a Swedish team sailing in San Francisco during the America's Cup. I don't think there were any Swedes on the team, but anyway, the point is, sailing's always been part of our DNA, and
That's great.
We still love to sail. I have family up and down the eastern seaboard in New England, and we do a lot of sailing in the summer. So
that's great. Well, all this talk about the label and having the wine so close, I think it's time to let's taste your Sauvignon Blanc and talk about it a little bit.
Yes.
I've always been a huge fan of the Sauvignon Blanc, and it is one of your signature grape varietals of the region, and certainly for your winery, because people have had, it's not a grape that people haven't heard of course, right. But it takes on so many different personalities, whether you're talking about a Sancerre from the Loire, which I know you love, or a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand versus a Sauvignon Blanc from Dry Creek Valley. What do you think is the signature style that people are getting in your Sauvignon Blanc?
Well, I'm going to answer that with two ways. First of all, there's no question that Sauvignon Blanc is sort of in the DNA of the winery, because my father was the first to plant Sauvignon Blanc in northern Sonoma County. And they told him it was a dumb variety, it would never grow. And of course, it's the most prominent white grape variety in Dry Creek Valley. And he really pioneered the wine that we call Fumé Blanc, which is still a flagship for the winery. It is 100% Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit different style, no oak aging, and is half Russian River Valley fruit, half Dry Creek Valley fruit. This wine that I chose for the tasting today is a little bit more of a reflection of my husband and my vision for the future. And when we took over from my father, Dad retired in 2006, we really made a very conscientious decision to focus much more exclusively on Dry Creek Valley appellated fruit. That was something we felt so strongly about. And so this is a 100% Dry Creek Valley Sauvignon Blanc. So right there, it tends to have a little bit more ripeness. We tend to pick the fruit at a little bit higher sugar because it's a little bit warmer climate than it doesn't have the Russian River component in it like the Fumé Blanc does. And then the other thing we did, which is really, really rare, I don't know of any winery in our area that has done this, is we planted the Sauvignon Musqué clone and the Sauvignon Gris clones. And these are two unique clonal selections that Sauvignon Musqué gives us a little bit more of a stone fruit, maybe floral kind of. I always think of sort of white peach and nectarine kind of aromatics. And Sauvignon Gris is a very obscure selection that doesn't really change the flavor, but does add body and texture. And it's used in Bordeaux, France, in very esteemed, chateaus, Chateau Smith-Aubryon, for example. So we planted, my husband was really instrumental with planting these clonal selections to just give us a little unique nuance. And then our winemaker, Tim, a number of years ago, started experimenting with a very small amount of barrel fermentation in neutral French, but chestnut and acacia barrels. Again,
I saw that on the tech notes and I was like, what?
Yeah, it's really, and this is not to give us any kind of woodiness or oak characteristics, because we tend to have a very minimal approach to our barrel program, but it was to, again, sort of provide a little more fleshiness, a little more texture, a little more roundness. And I happen to be extremely proud of this wine. I love this wine, and I think it has still the beautiful, refreshing, crisp zippiness that you want in Sauvignon Blanc.
It does. And I love the tropical fruit, exactly as you're describing it, the stone fruit, like that peach.
A little bit of, I always get that stone fruit peach, like really kind of fresh, fresh off the tree peaches. Maybe just a little bit of, right now in my glass right now, I'm smelling maybe a little bit of Tangelo, some of that citrus.
Yeah. Or melon too. I feel like I can kind of get there. And I do love the balance, as you're saying. You have that, that sort of floral fruitiness from the Musqué, which was all the rage back in the day. People talked about that, for a while. And then the Gris giving it that balance and structure. It's just so well balanced.
It's really,
a lot of people think, Sauv Blanc is going to be this big citrus bomb, hit you over the head. It's not that. It is so elegant.
And it doesn't have, the aggressive sort of herbaceousness or, kind of weediness that sometimes Sauvignon Blancs can veer towards. I really am very proud of this wine. And I'll tell you, I'll just brag a little. We were chosen at the California State Fair as this wine, 99 points, best Sauvignon Blanc in the entire state, which that's kind of wonderful. And then even here in our local hometown, they do sort of a People's Choice Awards. And this was chosen the last 2 years in a row as the favorite Sauvignon Blanc of our community, Healdsburg. So I think it's the kind of Sauvignon Blanc that pairs with a whole variety of foods, cuisine. It can be enjoyed by itself, simply by itself as, an aperitif or something like that. I think it would be beautiful with like scallops and all kinds of poultry and seafood things come to mind. But I love this wine. And I think what it does is it marries sort of the tradition and philosophy and passion that my father had and still has for Sauvignon Blanc. And he literally pioneered the varietal in Sonoma County. And it marries that with our vision for innovation and kind of evolving our Sauvignon Blanc program here at Dry Creek Vineyard by because we actually make several, let me think about it, 5 different Sauvignon Blancs. So, yes, 5 if you include our late harvest Botrytis Sauvignon Blanc, which we haven't been able to make for a couple of years. But
wow. All right. Well, I absolutely adore. I know it's suggested retail around $25, which is amazingly affordable, and I appreciate that. And the other thing I appreciate, last week I had on Megan Frank from the Dr. Frank Winery in the Finger Lakes of New York. And she's 4th generation at her family winery. And we were just talking about how rare it is for family businesses, family wineries being part of family businesses, to stay in the family. And I know how passionate you are about keeping the winery in your family and what that means and how that affects the quality of the wine and the focus of what you do. So talk to me a little bit about that and how people can really see that as a point of quality and know what they're getting.
Well, I too am really passionate about family businesses, and I think, what's happening today in the at least in the California wine industry and other parts of the world, but especially here, is somewhat alarming. And that is that there are just more and more wineries that are selling out, and this kind of increasingly what I call the increasing corporatization of the California wine industry, which leads to sort of this increasing homogenization of the wine industry. And one of the reasons why it's so important to be family owned is, first of all, what drives our winery is one thing and one thing only: a passion for quality and producing wines that taste of a sense of place and are appellation focused, what we say terroir driven and varietal defining. That's what I wake up wanting to do every single day. And I am blessed to have a team that want to do that too. And because we control all aspects of the business, everything from farming the grapes and picking where the grapes are going to actually be grown, to making the wine, to selling the wine, to, everything. We control everything right here, right on site. We're able to not dumb down the wine, to put it bluntly. And what I'm seeing happening is time and time again is, as companies sell, the very first thing that often happens is you'll see the appellation change, and you'll see on the label that what was maybe at one point, maybe Sonoma County or Napa Valley, or maybe in this case, Dry Creek Valley, you'll see it go to either a North Coast appellation, or you'll see California appellation. And I even saw one very famous producer recently with a label that said America as the appellation. Now, why do people do this? They do this to give the company, the winemaker, the flexibility to source fruit from all over the state of California in this case. But what they're really doing is they're allowing themselves to bring in grapes from less expensive, lesser regions. And, you really, and I'm not saying those wines aren't necessarily good, but I feel so strongly that you have to really pay attention to the two things on the label. And I'll just pick up this bottle and show you. So on the back label, every back label, consumers should be looking at what it says in terms of the produced and bottled by. If it says it was produced and bottled by, like here it says produced and bottled by Dry Creek Vineyard, that means we grew the grapes and we made the wine right here at the winery. If you see something that says vinted and bottled by, sometimes you see that. Sometimes you see, cellared and bottled by. That generally means that the wine is made from often bulk wine that is then blended or, some other way. And it's just kind of, I think produced and bottled by is really the guarantee that there's a human being and a family growing the grapes, making the wine right on site at their property. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing that I really am passionate about is the appellation, as I mentioned. And, looking on the label, it says Dry Creek Valley right there. And on the back label, it says Sonoma County right there. If you were to pick up this bottle and it said California, that just is a less specific appellation, and so on and so forth. And I'm seeing this more and more, and I'm not seeing it just for less expensive wines. I'm seeing it for more expensive wines, which is, again, kind of an alarming thing. So I think as consumers, it cannot be underscored how important it is to really, do your homework, look for brands that have very specific appellations, and look for brands that are owned by families, because, the fact that families, in our case, we've been in business for 53 years. And, and
amazing.
We work with many small growers that have been farming their grapes since I was a child. I've known these growers for 50 plus years. And I just think that really speaks volumes to a person's commitment to quality. So it's like, if I could give anybody a tip, it would be to really pay attention to the appellation and what the produced and bottled by says.
I love that, because I think it is confusing to a consumer. You walk in and there's hundreds of bottles possibly. And, just being able to look at those two things, I think really helps.
It really can help. And in our case, a number of years ago, decided to be very transparent, and we put all of the geeky winemaking information right on the front label. Between the front label and the back label, you know as much as the winemaker does.
That's awesome. Well, I know we're going to taste here in a minute this Dry Creek Vineyard Old Vines Zinfandel.
Yes.
I was reading that your dad was the first one to coin that term, old vine. And while it doesn't have a legal or sort of, defined definition by law, what does it mean to you, Old Vine Zinfandel? When you
Yeah.
put it on here, it means something,
It
right?
means something, very much so. So for us to qualify, it has to be at least 50 years or older. Now, after I got past 50, I thought, well, that's not old enough. But in
Yeah.
the case of this bottling, the average age is 95 years. And we put that again,
Wow.
Old Vines in label. We put the average vine age right there. This happens to be a blend of a couple of different vineyards. The oldest vineyard was planted in 1896. I mean, think about
Wow.
that, right? Prior to, I mean, it's incredible. But you're right. There's not a legal definition of old vine. And again, you will see, depending on the producer, various interpretations of what old vine is. And unfortunately, old vine is often used by marketing people to mean basically nothing. I don't think 10 or 20 or 15 years or even 30 years is old vine. I don't think you should be calling your wine old vine. But I will I'll take the blame for this term old vine. When we coined that term it was in the late 1980s, I had just come to work for the winery and I was in charge of the packaging, as we were speaking about. I was too ignorant to know you should trademark things. And so when we came up with the term, I said, Dad, yeah, let's do that. I'll put it on the label. And then I just never trademarked it. So shame on me. I went the hard way. But in this case, it is, the integrity of the vine age is very important to us. Anyway,
it means something when it's on your label. I do appreciate that. So let's taste this wine.
Yes.
And I already know I get this black fruit on the nose and this warmth. And it's like, I had a guest on and he was talking about a wine and said, it's like a big hug. So I'm feeling that's where we're going with this. I've only smelled it. I'm going to go in for a taste here in a second. But Zinfandel, just like Sauvignon Blanc, can express itself in so many different ways. And the winemaker can affect that with the wood and barrel aging. What is your, at Dry Creek, at least for this Old Vine Zin, what are you really, the style you're going for?
Well, because the vines are so old, they tend to be more concentrated. These are vines that are no more than 2 feet tall, Lori. They're actually hollow in the middle. They're incredible. They even produce fruit. Every time I see one, it's kind of remarkable. We get very, very low yields. So they're very concentrated. So you're going to notice a darker fruit tone, a little bit more, like you said, blackberry, boysenberry, as opposed to, we make a Zinfandel we call Heritage Vine Zinfandel, which tends to have more raspberry, so red fruit tones. This has darker fruit tones. You get, what I love about it is we get this beautiful spice that we associate with Zinfandel. So a little bit of maybe coriander and maybe some of the spices I always associate with Thanksgiving. Or cooking things, pumpkin pie. So cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, coriander, those kinds of spices. But you also get a nice level of acidity. So our style of Zinfandel is to not leave it on the vines too long and pick at too high of sugars to translate into too high alcohol. And this happens to be a personal philosophy and sort of a core part of our DNA here at the winery, is that we like wines that have good balance and are elegant with good levels of acidity. All the wines, whites and reds. And so while this is, I would consider, a very bold and expressive Zinfandel, it's not jammy or high in alcohol, overripe. It doesn't have any of those pruny kind of characteristics that sometimes Zinfandels from warmer regions like Lodi, for example, would have. And a lot of that has to do with this climate here in Dry Creek Valley, where we're so blessed. Again, my father sort of stumbled across the Dry Creek Valley, but it turned out to be such a smart decision, because even though the region we can have warm days in the summertime, we're only 20 miles from the Pacific Ocean. And so the fog influence and that marine layer that kind of comes up the valley every day in the summer, remarkably, will give us about a 30-degree shift in temperature on a daily basis. And so this is one of the reasons why Dry Creek Valley is famous for not only Sauvignon Blanc, but Zinfandel, of course, and even Cabernet and Bordeaux varietals. We just have a beautiful climate for ripening fruit over a long, gradual period, but not getting overripe because of the fog influence. And I feel like that's part of what we believe makes this Zinfandel special, in addition to the age. And then the last thing is that this is actually, we always blend a little bit of Petite Syrah into our Zinfandels. And in this case, it has a little bit of 1% Alicante Bouschet and 1% Old Vine Carignan. So kind of mimicking the field blends, which is how the old Italians, and I should have mentioned that, Italians were the ones that settled the Dry Creek Valley in the late 1800s, and they planted Zinfandel. So these are vines, these are vineyards that, were planted with a horse and plow by some Italian family back in the olden days. And somehow they managed to survive, during Prohibition, they were used for home winemaking. And of course, there was some wine making allowed for the church. But it's kind of remarkable that they did survive. And it's been very sad to see a lot of these great old historic Zinfandel vineyards be torn out over the years as more and more people have come to the region. And that's one of the reasons why we innovated with our heritage vine Zinfandel, which is, we'll talk about that another time, but that's where we took old vine budwood from the oldest vineyard in the area and then grafted that onto rootstock planted in a new vineyard to capture the DNA or the, kind of the heirloom characteristics of the old vines in a younger, newer planting.
I love that.
Yeah.
You say that you're trying to, balance the wine and retain that amount of acidity. I mean, obviously you have the climate and being close to the water to give you the ability to do that. But from a food friendly perspective, that does allow it to be more food friendly than some of the jammier, flatter styles, because acidity helps, pair with salts and acids and all these different things that are bound to be in your food,
Absolutely. Yeah. I love this wine. I really do. And again, they say every wine tells a story.
Yes.
And I think that this is a perfect example of that. Just think about, I really think about this survived the 1906 earthquake. This survived World War I, World War II. I mean, you think about what the families had to endure to survive, even just, Prohibition, the Great Depression, and here we are drinking a wine made from the exact same vines, from the exact same plot of land. The owners may have changed over the years, but in some cases they actually haven't. So that's
is remarkable, really. I don't think we taste things in normal life that we can go that back into history.
Right.
And speaking of history, we met a couple of years ago. I was leading a group of ladies on a wine tour of Napa and Sonoma, and you did a fabulous luncheon for us. We toured the winery, and then we got to end with a tasting of, I don't think it was 5 or 6 of your wines, and learn all about those. But visiting any winery anywhere, I think, is one of the best ways to really connect more with the wines of that region, of the winery. You just learn so much more by visiting and experiencing. And I know you're really passionate about that at Dry Creek Vineyard. Tell people, how can they get out there, visit you? What are some unique, fun things you're doing that they can take part of if they want to come on over and visit you in Dry Creek Valley?
Yes. Well, first of all, I will say, welcome, come for a visit. The Dry Creek Valley is beautiful and our winery is beautiful. We have extensive gardens and really one of the prettiest areas for picnicking. And we have a beautiful insectary garden that's part of our sustainability program. We offer all kinds of experiences, from the seated, kind of a seated tasting. We do a white wine flight. We do a Zinfandel flight. We do a Bordeaux varietals flight. We just launched a library flight of our single vineyard Cabernet called Endeavor, which is one of our most acclaimed red wines. We are offering a sustainability kind of farm tour, if you will. That's an off-road adventure in a UTV around the property. What else are we doing? And I think the other thing is, and this is something I will say with just my utmost, how do I say it? The utmost truth. One of the things I'm most proud about is that Dry Creek Vineyard is such a welcoming, and you've experienced this, Lori, it's such a welcoming place to come, because regardless of someone's knowledge of wine, we produce wines that appeal to such a broad range of people, from our beautiful, refreshing, aromatic, tropical dry Chenin Blanc to our most expensive, most highly regarded, coveted single vineyard Cabernet. And people can come to the winery and taste the wines, learn about the wines from a team who are warm and gracious. There really isn't a snobby bone in our body, and yet offered a first-class experience. And I was here actually Saturday with some friends, and I was just sitting outside, and I don't do that necessarily all the time, but I was watching different people come to the winery. And we had such a fabulous, diverse, fun group. We had, a young couple over here. We had a family with the dog and the 2-year-old over there. And we had, a bunch of guys over there. And we had people from over here. And we had some foreigners over here. And, just kind of this hodgepodge of people from all walks of life. And I thought to myself, this is what makes Dry Creek Vineyard special is, not only are we an authentic family winery producing the best wines in the history of the winery, to be honest, but we're sharing that with such a broad range of people, which is exactly what we need to do to continue to, get people to drink wine. And I
Yes.
love that. I really made me I was so just really happy. And then one more thing, when people come and visit, don't be surprised if you meet our newest employee. She's very cute. Her name is Claudine. And no, she's not a human being. She is a vintage French Citroën, which is a delivery truck from the 1970s that I bought. And our winery is styled sort of after kind of a small French country chateau, which, of course, my father loved the white wines of the Loire Valley, which inspired the architecture of the winery. And so it made a lot of sense. So I bought this vintage Citroën and turned it into a mobile wine bar. And she is cute. And we have weekends and events, and so it's just a fun place to taste. We have in the summer months her parked by the bocce courts, which we have, and she makes her guest appearance at various activities and events here at the winery. Anyway, I lovingly refer to her as Claudine.
Well, I can't wait to check out Claudine. I'm not sure I met Claudine when I was out there.
No, we didn't have Claudine.
Okay, now I need to come back, so that's good. I have a reason now.
Well, I'm in France, so it was inspired by my trips going to France.
I love that. And, I don't know if everyone gets excited about this. I know me and my daughter do. You have great swag at the winery as well. The store has great stuff. And I know a lot of us, after a little tasting, we love to purchase a little, something to remember our visit to the winery. And you have the greatest shirts and all kinds of things there at the winery. So you won't be disappointed if you like to shop. Wonderful. Well, Kim Stare Wallace from Dry Creek Vineyard, thank you so much for sharing these 2 wines, your family business story, your backstory. You're super inspiring for all of us. And to see how you came at the winery and you're carrying on your father's tradition. If you haven't checked out Dry Creek Vineyard, you just go to drycreekvineyard.com. I'll post all the links to your website and the 2 wines we tasted. I'll find a picture of Claudine and I'll put that out there. And just thank you so much for coming on The Sipping Point.
Thank you so much. I loved it. And I look forward to doing it again someday.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just end with cheers.
Cheers.